Welcome back to Music Student 101. It's time once again to show a little respect for some of the women composers of the classical music genre. Picking up where we left off from part 1 of the series, we'll continue with some composers from the Baroque and Classical periods. So let's get to it with your hosts, Jeremy Burns and Matthew Scott Phillips.
Hey, Matt.
Hey, Jeremy. How you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you doing?
Doing well. Doing well.
There's a lot of cool things to talk about today, and there's a lot of things to be excited about today on this episode, Matt.
Yeah, let's hear some of them, because we all need some good news.
Don't we?
Right?
So, for starters, this episode began with the probably a familiar tune to some of you, and that was the first time that myself and Brian Malloy and Jerry Chapman, as we call ourselves, or as I call us, the Area 47 band. Actually, this was our first project since the onset of the COVID pandemic, which was basically a year ago to this day, just about.
Excellent.
Yeah, so that's pretty exciting. Brian actually came into the studio, and we have it nice and open in here. We had some fans going until we started drumming, of course. And I was like, 20 feet away back here, so that was cool. Jerry, he's a little bit more nervous still. He's a little bit older.
I understand that. I am extremely hypochondriac and nervous.
Well, we did it much in the same way that we're doing this episode with Jerry, actually. I recorded the track and sent it to him with a click, and then he recorded his guitar separate of that and then sent me the solo guitar track back, and I was able to stick it all together here. So it was kind of cool how that worked out.
Wonderful. So good to hear.
Yeah, man. I'm excited about that. That means I just kind of felt like now that we got the studio back up, or at least I do down here, and vaccines are going out, and it's starting to feel more like creativity can resume the way it was before all this kind of put a damper on it.
And of course, that's a very famous song you guys did.
Oh yeah, I'm glad you recognize that. I imagine most people do. It is. This is the month of March. We're still kind of at a pace where we're doing one episode a month, and this is our official episode for March 2021. March is Women's History Month here in the United States. Did you know this?
Indeed, it is.
And that last episode for a women's history, I think it was episode 81. It was just like, hey, we just want to do an episode on women. But now it's actually a little bit more, what'd you say?
Thought out, organized.
Thought out. Hey, I would never admit to such. But can you, just off the top of your mind, can you think about 3 of your favorite women composers or artists? Or
oh gosh, there's so many. One of them we're probably we may talk about today. I don't know. One of them is probably got to be Elizabeth Claude Jacquette de Laguerre.
Oh, interesting.
For the name, if no other reason.
That's a great name.
Yeah, she was famous for her compositions of harpsichord music during the Baroque era, right? So the mid 1600s to about the the early 1700s ish, kind of. So yeah, there's definitely one. She's pretty awesome. And then of course the unflappable Clara Schumann.
Oh yeah, okay.
Who is really responsible for her husband Robert Schumann's musical career. He probably would have just not amounted to much had he not married so well, right?
He married up, huh?
Oh, absolutely. And then coming into the 20th century, Pauline Oliveiros, who is not necessarily the household name that Clara Schumann is, but did so much for computer music and electronic music when that genre of music was in its infancy and just coming into coming into being. Definitely somebody you should check out.
Nice. Good to know.
Yeah.
Is that it?
That's it. You know, I mean, that is by no means it. You know, I can sit here and think about women composers for a long time, and that's not even. You know, I'm sort of deliberately not including, you know, like singer-songwriters like Janis Joplin or.
I was gonna say it still counts though. You can still mention one of those if you want to.
Yeah, I'm still sticking to the composer moniker, quote unquote, and you know, just for the process of, you know, defining some parameters. So I yeah, we could talk about all sorts of other female artists too, but those are definitely three of my favorites.
Well, I define no such parameters because until researching for this episode, I really wasn't well versed on women composers. Sad to say, in the classical music genre, right? Now, of course, I have my favorites, as you can gather from the opening track, Aretha Franklin, certainly among them, as well as blues trailblazers such as Ma Rainey and Bessie Smith. Remember talking about them.
Yeah.
But some that I really got into over the years, I'll just name three quick kind of pop artists that I dug. Early on, Heart.
Oh, yeah.
As a kid.
Yeah, the singer and the guitar player was a sister duo, weren't they?
Ann and Nancy Wilson. I remember that song Alone. I was just spellbound by that piano at the beginning of it. And I always wanted to learn that as a kid. And it kind of actually got me even more interested in piano. And the harmonies are fantastic. I think about Magic Man and how badass that was.
Right.
And just something about the sibling harmonies. And I'll talk about that in a second as well. And speaking of harmonies, another one, I was dating a girl in high school who got me into the Indigo Girls. Emily Sellers and Amy Ray. Are you familiar with them? Now, sometimes you swear there's three people singing because of how well they arrange their harmonies, you know?
Right, yeah.
They do syncopations and take over where the other one began and move in different places, and it really sounds way more complex than it is. And I was just always amazed by their ability to do that and the way their voices blend, despite not being siblings. But more recently, I've been digging this band First Aid Kit out of Sweden.
So that's a new one to me.
Two sisters, Clara and Joanna Soderberg, and they're like in their mid-20s. They're very young, and we're doing it at least for about 5 years now. They've been playing music and making fantastic albums. And it's some of their voices are some of the sweetest I've heard together. You know, it's just fantastic. Great music.
Great.
And yes, the Janices and the Joan Jetts and all those
Pat Benatar and
trailblazers, man.
Yeah.
Tina Turner. Oh,
absolutely.
Boy, man.
Yeah.
I think there's a new story about her. Go on. I'm sorry.
Oh, I mean, we could go on forever. You know.
We could.
You know, Ma Rainey, Sister Rosetta Tharpe. Yeah.
Ooh. She could shred, couldn't she?
Oh,
she
man.
Could.
Oh, man. Like you wouldn't believe.
Well, all that to say, that's what we're going to be talking about today. Some heavy-hitting women composers, specifically from the Baroque and Classical eras.
Yes.
But first, we have a couple of other fun things to get into.
We do. We have some listener mail.
We do. We have 5 stars from Mr. Jung Stuffed.
Is it Jung Stuffed or Jung Stuffed? Do you
Maybe
think?
Jung, Jung.
Yeah, who knows?
I wonder if I should have Googled that first. Before reading. I'll go back and Google that.
Anyway, so he says, I'm 36 and just getting into making head-banging dubstep.
Head-banging
dubstep. Probably not most of your listening base, winky winky. Well, you know, you never know. I think our listening base is getting more eclectic by the day. I listen to this podcast all day at work, and it helps me not feel so clueless on theory. Well, that's great. That is exactly what we're here for. Most of it is far above what I know, but I keep listening, and I learn a little more every day. I find it really helpful when they play examples / count out things they are teaching. Keep it up, and thanks, guys. Well, thank you, and thank you for that wonderful review. Always nice to have people learning things, and you know, I mean, and feeling less clueless. I think the point is to feel a little less clueless, right?
Less clueless.
Clueless.
That's what I'm going for.
Yeah, absolutely.
In general. Oh, to have a clue.
Yeah. So,
So thanks again, Mr. Jung Stuffed. We really do appreciate the reviews, and again, they help to spread the word about our show. If you're going to look for a podcast and you see if you're looking for like a music education podcast and you see one that has nothing but all these 5-star reviews and good comments on it, that's the one you're going to go to, you know?
So you are helping other people feel less clueless as well. So.
Mm-hmm. And other news, we have a Patreon shout out we would like to give.
Indeed.
Now, Justin Ramirez is out of Houston, Texas, and Justin is also writing on behalf of Joaquin.
Joaquin, yeah.
A family member, I assume, or a friend, maybe?
Yep.
What does Justin have to say?
So Justin says, Joaquin has started up piano. I mainly play guitar, but if it can make a noise, I'll find some use for it. We listen to damn near everything except contemporary country. Especially anyone who wears seashell anklets / necklaces. Kenny Chesney, I'm looking at you.
We're looking at you, Kenny.
Or those super curled cowboy hats. I'm not even sure what's up with those.
I know the hat.
I have a list of artists I dive into for extended periods, checking out everything, almost like a study of the full discography and not just spinning the greatest hits albums. Been stuck on Zappa for the past 2 years. That's a journey to go down for sure.
Yeah, totally.
Joaquin can recite the story of Nanook.
Are you familiar with that song?
Oh, very vaguely. Very vaguely.
I think that's the one where the evil fur trader clubs on Frank Zappa's favorite baby seal, so he decides to hit him in the face with a dog piece no cone.
Right, yeah. Exactly, yeah.
Oh, gosh.
Anyway, so aside from that, the steady mix and playlists include proggish bands, Houston local black metal and crossover thrash, and a lot of King's X, Saigon Kick, Living Color, Jane's Addiction, Galactic Cowboy. So kind of, like that sort of interesting prog / funk, crossover that kind of happened in the 90s.
I wonder if Justin would like maybe heavy metal dubstep.
I don't know. It's check out some headbanging dubstep and see what he thinks of it.
Headbanging dubstep, that's it.
A fair amount of Grieg, Chopin, and Debussy get thrown into the mix too.
Nice taste. Nice.
Yeah, very eclectic. I came across MT101 in a search for music theory podcasts, either on Google Podcasts or Podbean. I think I started several, but none really had hosts with a chemistry or approach as the two of yous guys. Chemistry, yeah. We ought to have chemistry now. We've only known each other for a couple of decades at this point.
Oh, has it been more than half our lives now? Oh, Lord.
At least half. Half.
Yeah.
I think, so... hope all is well on y'all's end of the mic, and I know Joaquin will get a huge kick out of hearing y'all mention him on the cast.
Yeah?
Yeah, well, shout out to Joaquin.
Hey, Joaquin. Keep on listening, my friend.
Yeah, I really hope we're pronouncing your name correctly now. Even more than I normally hope we're doing that.
It's spelled like Joaquin Phoenix, so that's why I'm using
Joaquin, yeah, right.
Joaquin, correct us if we got that wrong.
Please do, yeah. We'll shout out again and say it right.
And keep on playing that piano, my friend.
So yeah, that is what's happening on the news front. Mm-hmm. On the listener response front.
Well, we want to thank you again, Justin, for supporting us, and Joaquin for supporting us on Patreon.
Indeed, thank you very, very much. Do you want to remind everyone about our Patreon page?
It seems obligatory, does it not?
That's what you do.
Yeah, so we have, if you go to patreon.com/musicstudent101, you can see where you can actually give us like a monthly donation. For example, if you give us $1 a month, you can get onto the site and access all the wonderful videos and extra content. And for $3 a month, you get what might soon be a travel mug. It was a coffee mug, but more on that later on. For $5, we'll actually answer a question and turn it into a little mini episode on Patreon. So there's cool little perks to look into. And some people want to support us with just a one-time donation. They can do that on paypal.com. You can go to our website and click on donations and find out more about that.
Excellent.
Another thing that is going to be soon on our website is, and I'm almost going to say this right now because it's not entirely ready yet, but there will be T-shirts. There will be T-shirts.
Music Student 101 T-shirts.
It's just one of those companies where you send them a design. It's Redbubble, and you send them a design, and you can print it on shirts, and you can kind of tweak it, and you can put it on all kinds of stuff. There's like clocks and shower curtains, and it gets a little ridiculous. You know, I would be a little scared to think someone bought a Music Student 101 shower curtain.
Hey, you never know.
But if you do, take a picture of it.
Yeah, if you have a Music Student 101 shower curtain, definitely take a picture of it and send it our way.
But you can find things like this on this redbubble.com site. And like I say, when I get my shirt in and I'm happy with it and I know it looks good, because I ordered one and the logo was a little bit low, I resent them the design, and I'll probably get that in the next few days. And I'll go ahead and put that up on the Facebook page and the website and the Facebook group.
Right,
once I get that. So that's exciting as hell. And one more cool little thing. I do want to, in lieu of a listener mail, or I guess instead of a listener mail, I want to give you this cool little follow-up. I don't know if you recall, Matt, but back in episode 55, which was quite a while ago, we talked about one of our fellow Birmingham musicians who met with an unfortunate accident. Michael Moore got his hand caught in one of his machines. He's a woodworker.
I do remember that.
And he lost his left pinky and ring finger completely, as well as most of his middle finger.
Yeah.
Needless to say, it was a dark and difficult period for Michael. Not long after that accident, his cousin Kenny Barnes showed up at the house with a left-hand guitar. Kenny and his cousin Jennifer Yates and his aunt Pat Webb all went in on this left-handed guitar. And Kenny bought one for himself so they could engage in a little friendly competition. Who can learn left-hand guitar? Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
Okay, so 2 years later, I checked in with Michael, and he said the following. Hey, Jeremy, thank you very much for remembering the accident. It's been 2 years and a few months. So yeah, I've switched to left-handed guitar playing. I played a little right-handed lap steel for a short time, but that was never going to satisfy me. My good friend and bandmate Michael Callahan has dragged me back into playing with a singer-songwriter, and he's also playing along. Michael Callahan is the bassist, if I recall. Callahan, he says, got me out of mothballs about 12 years ago as well. I owe him a lot. Actually, losing the fingers has made me love music even more than I already did.
Wow.
Isn't that cool? Yeah. The biggest challenge for me has been torsional control of my left hand now for picking. I've spent a lot of time observing and adjusting how I try to build that control. There's precious little online about this stuff. I thought for a while to try to develop a few YouTube things about how to train your submissive hand to switch in case of an accident or medical issue, which is not incredibly rare. So anyways, I work as a furniture maker and I play guitar, and I hope to be on stage again soon. The songwriter is already doing the odd limited live thing, and I get my first vaccine next Tuesday. So thanks again for asking, and I'm touched someone remembers such a thing. Also, I think it's proper to give a shout out to Michael Callahan, which it sounds like he was doing anyways. He also wants to give a shout out to his wife, Emily Dazelle, without whom he could not have done this, says he. So another great woman to give a shout out to on this episode.
Wonderful. It's great to hear that story that of coming back from something like that. I mean, yeah. I can't imagine, as a musician, I can't imagine how I would feel in that situation.
I don't think words can even describe.
Yeah. So to hear him doing well and to be still pursuing his music and everything else, is really inspiring.
To get hit that hard by one of your passions, like he's a furniture maker, he cuts off his hand in the machine. He's still a furniture maker. Yeah. That didn't stop him. That didn't really phase him or weaken him. Yeah. This is amazing fortitude and testimony to the human spirit and what it's capable of.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Good job, Michael Moore.
Congratulations. Yeah.
All right, now let's talk about some of these women composers, shall we, Matt?
Let's do that.
And of course, as I like to do, I will go ahead and prattle out just a few resources.
Uh-huh.
Okay, classical.net.
That's
Very
a good one.
resource. Yeah, smithsonianmag.com. They pretty solid source. They've been around for a while. encyclopediabritannica.com, encyclopedia.com, oxfordmusiconline.com.
That's also a good one. That's one music academics use.
A tough one about that one is I can get the little synopsis, but if I want the whole article, I have to pay for a subscription.
Oh, yeah. They're legit. You got to fork over some cash for...
One day, maybe Music Student 101 can afford to do that. But in the meantime, I just clean what I
Yeah,
can.
join our Patreon page and send us money so we can subscribe to the Oxford Dictionary of Music and the Grove Dictionary Online, which is another big one that music scholars use. It'll help us have more informed podcasts. So
Indeed.
Your money won't go to waste.
And of course, when I normally like to use more notable sources, I do go to Wikipedia whenever I have to. Some of these were very there's just not a lot of information on a lot of these composers, unfortunately.
There really isn't. Yeah, there really isn't. You kind of have to dig. Yeah, it feels like there's more information coming out now on subjects like women composers in the Renaissance, for example, or in the Baroque era. You know, as interest of those things have risen over the last couple of decades, you know, we're uncovering more information. But for a long time, there was a very great dearth.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, on episode 81, we began our discussion of female composers, and we covered women in ancient music, everything up into and including 1100 CE, Common Era.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And some of these were, Kozrovidukt was the first one of Armenia.
I remember that, yeah.
We talked about our good Hildegard von Bingen.
Yeah, the Sibyl of the Rhine.
And then Comtessa de Dia of the Middle Ages.
Yeah.
Now that was 1100 to 1450.
Yeah.
And then we topped it off with a couple of notable composers from the Renaissance period, Marilena Casolana and Vittoria Eoletti. Eliotti, I'm sorry. And that took us up into about the 1600s.
Right.
Now, as time went on, women became more and more prevalent in the classical music genre. So on this episode, I'm hoping to cover a few heavy-hitting female composers of the Baroque and Classical era, like I said earlier.
Okay.
And that should bring us up into about the 1800s.
Right, where it really starts to get plentiful in terms of go-to names that people have heard of. But yeah, up until then, yeah, it's still a little bit slim pickings in the Baroque and Classical era.
Oh yeah.
You can find examples of women composers, but yeah.
Tell me about it. And I'm glad you brought up Elizabeth Claude
Jacquette de Laguerre.
Jacquette, because she was
pardon the horrible French accent, but
she was on my list. I was going to do 4 per era, but for time's sake, I decided just to do 3.
Okay.
And I'm glad you mentioned her because she was on my list, but I didn't actually get around to her. Mm-hmm. But she was of the Baroque era. Now, coming out of the Renaissance period and into the Baroque period, can you kind of tell our listener a few differences between the two periods and
just in the periods in general, huh?
Yeah, as it pertained to music, I suppose.
So let me think. The Renaissance is a period in which almost all European music is vocal. Mm-hmm. So everything is sung. And you have this big, so some music is considered sacred music or religious music, people writing music for the mass and things like that. And then there's also a lot of what people thought of as secular music, just pop songs and fun stuff, madrigals and what have you. But without being a scholar of the period, it's hard to tell the difference, right? Because everything is vocal. The first instruments are invented in the Renaissance. They're usually what we called consorts. So there would be 4 voice types of a single instrument, like the recorder, for example. There would be a soprano, alto, tenor, and bass recorder. Mm-hmm. Or the viol, which is an ancient string instrument. There would be a soprano, alto, tenor, bass version of that. And so you would play in a consort. And occasionally, you wouldn't have an alto singer or whatever, so you would just get somebody playing their recorder or their viol or whatever to sit in and play that part on their instrument rather than have it be sung. But the emphasis is very much vocal, right? And this is in the Renaissance still. Moving from that into the Baroque era, instruments start gradually becoming a more important part of European music. So that by the end of the Baroque era, we are talking about legit composers who are composing instrumental music, like Bach and Vivaldi. You know, we have our first virtuoso, performers. Vivaldi is a virtuoso violinist in addition to a composer and all that. So by the end of this area, instruments are very prominent. In the beginning of the Baroque era, you have this sort of shift into this sort of texture in which you have things like what we call a ground bass, which is a sort of a sequence of notes, 3, 4, 5 notes, repeated over and over and over again in the bass.
Yeah.
Yeah, they actually called it basso ostinato when that happened, right?
Right, yeah.
Yeah, and then above that are chords that are played. Usually on an instrument like the harpsichord, which is a Baroque era instrument. It's like the piano, but the strings are plucked rather than struck with a hammer. Mm-hmm. Or it is on something that we call a theorbo, which is like a string instrument, a guitar or a lute-like instrument from that time, or something else. And what they're doing is playing this ground bass over which they're sort of improvising chords, usually. Mm-hmm. And that part was not written down. The bass notes of the bass were written down, but the improvised chords above it were done by this thing called figured bass, which is where we get this, the figured bass notations that we've talked about in music theory today is from this. It was just sort of a shorthand to say play this interval and this interval above your ground bass at this point, and so they would improvise where exactly, but that's what they would do.
Oh, yeah. I can't remember when we talked about that, but it was pretty early on if you're scrolling.
Right. Yeah.
Figured bass, I think we actually called it that.
This is sort of born, the idea of figured bass is sort of born in this era, in the early Baroque era. And the early Baroque era, much more famously and importantly, probably, is known for the invention of opera. So we have the first operas being composed and performed, which is a dramatic work, a work that tells a story with multiple characters and everything, just like a play would, just like if you went to the theater and saw a play, except that everything is sung and everything is musical. All the characters are singing their different parts. There are these musical components to everything. There's things called recitative, where you're sung in a way where you can sort of move the story forward because you're singing in a way that people can understand the words, so that you can sort of move the story forward. And then there's the arias that are the big emotional asides. And this is all coming from this sort of ideological thing called the Florentine Camerata, where people are saying we should do certain things to convey the emotion of the text, right? We should have these little ornamental trills in our vocal line so that people know that the character is crying, or that the character is depressing or lamenting or whatever. Or we should have these a little vocal gymnastics to reflect that emotion, because it's opera, right? We're acting as well as singing, And this is new in the Baroque era,
Is this one of your favorite techniques, Matt, word painting?
Well, this is this is in contrast of word painting, right?
Okay,
And Jeremy's laughing because I apparently expressed my somewhat sarcastic opinion about that. But word painting is you get to the word high and you sing a high note, right? Or on the word valley you sing down, right? Or on the words climbing up the hill you go climbing up the hill, whatever. This is like late Renaissance stuff, like late Renaissance English magical stuff. The Baroque stuff is like, we're not going to do that. We're going to trill our voice, or make our voice, or tremolo our voice, make it shake, or we're going to sing, with these giant swells or whatever. We're going to do these things to make our vocals sound, like they're conveying the emotion, not just sort of this allegorical representation, like high note versus the word high, but actually sort of sing the feeling of what the words are, right?
It's almost like we're approaching the realm of acting.
Yeah, we're kind of acting a little bit. Yeah, we're kind of trying to express emotion. So this is where we are in the early Baroque era.
So so when we're talking Renaissance, we're talking mainly vocal, and then there could be more than one lines, but it was usually pretty sparse. And then we get into the Baroque period where we're starting to put actually instruments, not just one or two, but many together.
Yeah, and like the vocals of the Renaissance, when I think about those, what calls to mind are these highly polyphonic, multi-voice textures, like the Jacquette de Pré textures and things. Whereas coming out of like the Florentine Camerata, when you talk about Giulio Caccini and then some of the other people, what you're talking about really is a single vocal line with a what we call a ground bass. Right. More, two at most, but usually a single vocal line, and the vocal line is this singer singing an aria, or this, generally, yeah.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned Giulio Caccini because that's probably where we're going to begin. Here in the Baroque era, I'm doing these more or less in chronological order. Even though people started. Chronological order by birth, even though some of these people started later in life and everything. But
right.
In the Baroque period, the first one, and probably one of the most notable, is Francesca Caccini. And yes, she was born on September 18th, 1587 in Florence, Italy, to Giulio Caccini, who you just mentioned.
Right, who was a member of the Florentine Camerata, who came up with this whole we should do effects with our voices to express emotion thing. Yeah, he was one of the first composers to adopt that.
And okay, perfect. That makes perfect sense. Because this was in Florence, Italy, like you were saying. And,
absolutely, yeah.
So her father was also an influential composer who worked with the Medici family. And,
a very powerful political family in Italy at the time.
Yeah, I think like they basically didn't we kind of say that they financed the Renaissance.
Pretty much owned everything. Yeah. in Italy in this time period, what is not owned by the church is probably owned by some version of the Medicis.
So her mother was Lucia Gagnolanti, and unfortunately, her mother passed away when she was only 6 years old. And her father remarried Margherita de Scala a year later. Her siblings, and eventually her stepmother were all talented singers, and her biological mother was as well. But in 1600, at age 13, Francesca, Margherita, and her younger sister, Settimia, performed together in a vocal ensemble.
Oh, nice.
And I imagine Giulio, her father, was very instrumental in kind of getting them going and supporting them and everything. But aside from voice, she was also trained in guitar, lute, keyboard, harpsichord, organ, and harp, and also composition at a very early age.
Indeed.
Quite the multi-instrumentalist.
That was a thing back then. Serious musicians were trained in multiple instruments.
And of course, this was before the piano, so that's the harpsichord.
Right.
When I say keyboard, I'm thinking harpsichord and organ, right? Because we did have those.
Harpsichord, organ, clavichord. Mm-hmm. You know, are the big ones. Yes, this is before the invention of the piano.
A fun little fact, in 1605, she was offered a lucrative gig as a vocalist for the court of King Henry IV. But Grand Duke Ferdinand got a little possessive and said, no, we want to keep her talents within Florence and within the Medici court. So that's kind of a compliment, but it's also a little possessive, is it not?
That kind of thing happens. You know, Haydn got thrown in jail by the Esterhazy, so he wouldn't take a better job.
Oh, yeah? Interesting.
Yeah, fun story.
Back before musicians had any control over their lives?
Right, yeah.
Okay. So, anyways, in 16...
Like we have so much control over them now, but, you know.
That's what I was going to say, yeah. Some things don't change. Some things do, I guess, you know. So, anyways, in 1607 and into the following 2 decades, she followed her dad's footsteps and continued to teach, compose, and perform for the Medici family. And during this time, she married Giovanni Battista Signorini.
Signorini, okay.
Yeah, Signorini.
Little Mister.
Little Mister. That's funny. And it was by arrangement, so I guess this was a pretty common thing back then. But Giovanni was also a tenor and a string player, so they ended up performing a lot together. During this time, she also became the highest paid musician in the Medici court.
Good for her.
The highest paid musician by probably the wealthiest family. That's
in
a pretty
Italy.
big deal. In Italy, that's a pretty big deal.
Oh, yes.
And what else? Oh, in 1618, she published Il primo libro della musiche.
Musiche.
Yeah, M-U-S-I-C-H-E.
Musiche.
Okay. Il primo libro delle musiche.
The first book of music.
Yeah, that's got to be it, because the article I read said the first book of madrigals, but that comes up later on, and there's another Italian word for madrigals, so let's just go with that.
Yeah.
The first book of music. Correct me if there's other Baroque historians who know otherwise. But this little release of hers was dedicated to Cardinal Cosimo de' Medici, the son of the ever-possessive Grand Duke Ferdinand, who would let her go to work for King Henry's court.
Yeah, those Medicis were something else, man. You know, there were a couple of Medicis that became popes, you know, and yeah, it's hard to overestimate how powerful a family that was.
There
but
wasn't
anyway,
as much separation between church and state back then.
Not so much, no. I mean, I don't know. I've already given one overblown history lesson, but not as much as they would have had you believe, I think.
Okay, so moving on, in 1624, she would become the first woman to write an opera.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it was officially called an opera at the time, because it was a pretty new thing. This was La Liberazione de Ruggiero de la Isola de Alcina. The liberation from Ruggiero from Alcina's island.
Yeah, the liberation of Ruggiero from the island of whatever that other word was.
Alcina.
Alcina. Okay.
Yeah. And y'all forgive our Italian. We're Alabama boys. There's going to be a lot of this. But anyway, this was also commissioned by a woman, the Archduchess Maria Maddalena, and it featured women in powerful roles. So not only was the first opera written by women, but it was also it was a little empowering, I think, for women, and it was also one of the earliest known versions of musical theater, first performed in 1625. How about that?
First performed in 1625. Yeah, that was right at the beginning of opera.
So it's cool to know that she was kind of right up in there. And then the year later, 1626, at age 39, she was basically the most prominent woman musician in Europe at this point. She was known to rub elbows with many influential and notable figures, among them Galileo. They just kind of hanging out with Galileo. Or maybe he should have been honored to be hanging out with Francesca.
Well, maybe he should have been. Well, Galileo's father was also a prominent musician and member of the Florentine Camerata, Vincenzo Galilei.
No kidding.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. I guess it all makes sense.
Yeah.
They all ran in those circles then.
Yeah. It's a small town, sounds like.
They all revolved in those circles. Galileo joke. Okay.
I see what you did there.
Thank you.
Yeah, that one took me a minute. Okay, yeah, we revolved around it. Okay.
Okay. Anyway, but we digress as we do. So in addition to her book of madrigals and opera, she created at least 16 other stage works that have been lost throughout time. Though her compositions steered away from some of the dissonances that were made popular by Monteverdi,
right,
who was her contemporary, she was known to be skilled in the art of harmonic surprise. And tell me if this makes sense to you, Matt. It is said that she used harmony more so than counterpoint to accomplish this effect.
This would be sort of time period wise. This is around what could be thought of as the infant stages of what we would come to consider harmony. Whereas we've been doing counterpoint, and we've had these laws of counterpoint that have existed forever. We did 3 whole podcasts about them back in the day. She and Monteverdi and the people of this time are composing in a way in which these voices are less independent from each other than that, where they are sort of coalescing almost by way of the strictness of these rules, coalescing into common co-occurrences of given notes. Like if you're on the note C, you're going to see A and E around it a lot, or E and G around it a lot, et cetera, et cetera. There's going to become what we call chords. And Monteverdi is experimenting with dissonances and saying, hey, all these things that we avoid, they're not so bad when you get used to them, kind of, And he's creating a big stink with that. We're starting to sort of understand the aesthetic impact of what would later become harmony. So yeah.
Okay. Makes sense. Because before there was what we kind of consider harmony, there was definitely counterpoint.
Harmony and counterpoint really are the same thing. I harp on this a lot, but
I kind of thought so too. But I guess I don't know.
Yeah. What we're really talking about is the independence of voices versus the interalliance of voices. I suppose you could say it that way.
Okay. Independence meaning they move independently of each other. I mean,
exactly.
They're different lines of music. Yeah.
Different note values, different rhythmic values, and all that stuff. Yeah.
And versus what was the other word you used?
The interalliance. And so, like, these notes go together to make a chord. Yeah. These are notes that sound in a chord with each other. Hence, we get the word chord, right?
This kind of harkens back to your analogy with the sides of beef.
Yes.
What was it again?
You don't create a succession of chords. Don't make a piece of music any more than a pile of beef tips makes a cow.
Okay, there you go. Well, I guess she got that and used it for the element of surprise in her music, which I think is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So, though the details of her passing are kind of unconfirmed, it's believed that she died in August of 1646, just south of Lucca, which is in Italy, North Italy, I believe.
Right.
Northern Italy. And she inherited her musical talent, as we know from her father, Giulio. Well, she also passed down that to her daughter, Margherita, named after her stepmother, who enjoyed a great success as a vocalist for the remaining years of her life.
Excellent.
So that is Francesca Caccini.
Right.
Now we can move on, shall we?
Yes.
you and I, before we got on this, before we started rolling, we were talking a little bit about Barbara Strozzi.
Barbara Strozzi. Yeah.
Did you get a chance to listen to her music?
A little bit.
Briefly?
Well, the aria Lagrime Mie is probably it's still very, very famous and taught. Yeah, and it's this classic ground bass versus single singer. You know, this soprano with a ground bass texture. Yeah, and it's famous for all of the. You know, it's a great example of all of these things we were talking about with the vocal trills and the vocal ornaments. You know, they call them mordents and other things that happen in early Baroque vocal music. Yeah.
Lagrime Mia, is that My Tears? I Cry?
My Tears. Yeah.
Something like that. Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, well I can see where that a song named that would have room for emotion.
Expressive, emotive text. Yeah.
Yeah, like you're talking about.
Yep.
Well, let's take it from the top, shall we, with Barbara Strozzi.
Okay.
She was born August 6th, 1619.
Mm-hmm. So we're still in the early Baroque era.
Yes, very much. A.K.A. Barbara Valle, Valle. She was born in Venice, actually, Venice, Italy. So far, 2 Italian composers. And I'll just go ahead and say, when I was researching, I was trying to find as many non-Italian composers as I could because there's so many Italian and German composers. I wanted a little bit of diversity. But I was also going by who had the most interesting kind of stories, too.
Sure.
Notoriety. But anyways, all that to say, we have another Italian composer. And she was adopted by the poet Giulio Strozzi, whose name she eventually took.
Who is possibly her biological father. It is also kind of hard to know.
Well, yeah, it's kind of interesting. Her mother, Isabella Garzoni, was a servant in Giulio's household.
Right.
So there is some speculation as to whether Giulio was more than her adopted father, right?
Right.
There was also some speculation that Isabella may have been a courtesan, but I'm not one to gossip.
Yeah, who knows?
But if you're curious, courtesan is a word back then for, I guess, a high-class prostitute.
Yeah.
What we would maybe call an escort.
Yeah, sort of both of those jobs.
I don't know. Yeah. Anyways, back to Barbara. That was her stepmother. Not a lot was known about her youth. It is known that by the age 12, she began to develop her musical skills, and she would sing accompanying herself on the lute, or the, how do you pronounce that? The
theorbo.
Theorbo. It's really looking at the picture, it looks like a bass lute. You know, like a really big.
Yeah, it's got a really long neck. I've seen them before where the neck just looks like it's 6 feet long. It's just crazy, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, her father, Giulio, I'm also noticing that these 2 women both had fathers named Giulio.
There were a lot of Giulios.
A lot of Giulios, a lot of Marias, a lot of Anna Marias.
Yep.
Her father recognized these talents and brought her to Francesca Cavalli, who was a well-established Italian composer. Are you familiar with Cavalli?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Anyway, he gave her more formal instruction on composition. By 15 years old, she gained notoriety for her vocal virtuosity, and then a year later, by 16, her dad was very active in publicizing her talents. Okay, so her dad, Giulio, was also a member of the Accademia degli Incogniti.
The Academy of Understanding?
Unknowns, close.
Unknowns, incogniti. Okay,
Incogniti, yeah. And this was a group of intellectuals that would gather and discuss literature, ethics, religion, aesthetics, art, and etc. Sounds kind of like a TED Talk to me.
It was basically the 17th century version of that, yeah.
Yeah. But there was little focus on music, so Giulio branched off and established the Accademia degli Unisoni.
Degli Unisoni, yeah.
Which, isn't that just one? Is that unison?
The Academy, the Academy of Ones?
I don't know.
Yeah.
That's what it is. Anyway, this group
Or
would
the
meet
Academy of Unisons. Or Unity, maybe. Something like
Unity. I can see that.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of going through our Latin roots here.
Exactly.
Anyway, this group would meet up at the Strozzi residence, and young Barbara would showcase her talents there, as they would really focus on music more so.
Right.
So anyways, in 1644, she published her first volume of works, Il primo libro de madrigali, the first book of madrigals.
That is the first book of madrigals, yeah.
And madrigali, I'm sure, means madrigal. I'm pretty sure about that.
Pretty sure.
And I wonder if she knew about Caccini's first book of, I'd say madrigals, but I guess that was music. A little confusion in there.
I think it just means their first book, not the first one ever.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, okay, that makes more sense. I think if I wrote a book of poems, I wouldn't call it the first book of poems. I would call it my first book of poems. But that's just me.
Well, you're not Italian.
I'm half Italian.
Yeah, half Italian, yeah. So
You wouldn't know it. You wouldn't know it by looking at me or talking to me. But anyways, some scrutinized her personal life and thought her to be a courtesan. One of the most known pictures of her shows her posing with a lute, or I say the word again, theorbo.
Theorbo, yeah.
And her breasts were exposed. And there's two schools of thought on this. One is just to leap to, oh no, she's a courtesan. And then others argue that it was a demonstration of her motherhood.
Oh man, don't we just have the same arguments today?
I believe we do.
Couldn't that exact argument just happen today, right? Art versus pornography.
Yeah. And then I guess why some would argue her to be the courtesan was that she never married, which was rare in those days for someone to have 4 kids and never marry. The father of these 4 kids was Count Giovanni Wiedemann, who is a Venetian nobleman, possibly a friend of her dad's, and of course the patron of the arts. So, interesting food for thought. But that's all speculation. In her lifetime, Strozzi published 8 volumes of her own music. The 4th of these is unaccounted for. But she was said to be the most prolific composer of secular vocal music in Venice at the time period, having composed over 100 pieces. And just a refresher, secular music being anything not of the church.
Right, not a mass or a motet or anything like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. In fact, only one of these 8 volumes contained sacred songs. So her lyrics were, like I said, more secular. Her lyrics were famously poetic and articulate. And like many composers at the time, her text quoted other poets, but she also had some of her own creation. And then some of them actually subtly hinting at gender issues. So she was kind of speaking out, you know.
Yeah, well, she was a little bit of a pioneer, you know, all the way back in the 1600s.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And now about 75% of her compositions were soprano voice. Mm-hmm. But she did compose for other voices.
Yeah, Lagrime Mie is for, I believe, soprano.
Okay, soprano. Mm-hmm. All right. Although operas were kind of all the rage in that time and place, she didn't really compose any, which I thought was very, very odd. You know what I mean?
It is a little. I mean, her music is so opera-like, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, that is interesting.
Yeah, she mainly focused on, like I said, other vocal works such as arias and cantatas, right?
Mm-hmm.
Aria being that kind of vocal aside you were talking about, the.
Right, yeah, the expressive, lyrical, musical version of arias where a single singer sings, and the words are not designed to move the plot forward, but are designed to ruminate on what that particular character is feeling at the time. Mm-hmm. You know, it is kind of analogous to, what do you call it in theater, when you just sort of are talking to the characters just sort of talking to themselves. Soliloquy.
Oh yeah. Okay. I was gonna say monologue, but I guess soliloquy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah, and then she died in northern Italy in 1677 at 58 years old. So that is the story of Barbara Strozzi.
And then we have one more, right?
We do have one more, actually. The name kind of interested me on this one, and not to mention this is finally a non-Italian but a German composer.
Yay.
Yeah.
I mean, not yay. We love Italians, but you know.
Ooh, boy, you better watch yourself, man. Don't let Fran hear you say that. Speaking of the women in our lives.
Yeah, no kidding.
Is that from Francesca?
Is what from Francesca?
Fran.
Oh, Fran. Oh, absolutely. Yes. Her grandmother was Francesca.
Cool. Anyways, this is, we're going to be talking about our final person of the Baroque. Our final woman composer of the Baroque era will be Princess Anna Amalia of Prussia. Princess of Prussia.
And now this one was a new one to me, so I'm excited.
You know, it's kind of cool to hear the princess. Can you imagine being a princess and a composer?
No.
I feel like a badass if I was a princess and a composer. And if I had a friend that was one of those, I would always introduce them as...
Is the composer princess?
Yes, this is my friend Amalia, the composer princess. Anyways, we digress.
Yeah, we're good at that.
Anna Amalia was born in Berlin, Germany on November 9th, 1723, to Sophia Dorothea of Hanover and Frederick William I, the King of Prussia.
Aha.
Hence, she's a princess.
Right.
She was one of 10 surviving children, which there's conflicting reports, whether there was 14 or 8 or 10. I don't know. I just went in the middle there. A child of the Enlightenment, when women had played a bigger role in social affairs, Anna spent the first couple of decades in the family castle.
Okay.
Her father, the king, was rather the hot-tempered sort and was often physically abusive. It was said that he would drag her by her hair when angry at her. In addition to being a jerk to her, he didn't like music.
How do you even not like... I don't even understand.
This is a problem individual.
I guess... Well, I mean, I guess in this time period, there's only one kind of music. So if you don't like that particular kind of music, you just have to decide you don't like music at all. You know, I mean, he... You know, the King of Prussia had never heard jazz, right? I mean...
Maybe if he heard headbanging dubstep, he might give it
he would be all about that. But, you know, unfortunately, that's not going to exist for a long time to come.
Well, you know, though she was musically inclined, for this reason, her dad not liking music, she didn't really begin any formal musical training until after her father passed away in 1740 when she was 17 years old. So it turns out her mother did like music and supported her in that effort.
Well, good.
And so did a host of other court musicians, but more notably, her brother and future king Frederick II taught her some of her first music lessons. She became well-versed in the harpsichord, flute, and violin. Now, fast forward to 1755, she became the abbess of Quedlinburg. And this, have you ever familiar with this?
Well, no, I was just going to ask, so abbess, does that mean she became a nun, or am I just...
You know, this is interesting because what the House of Quedlinburg was, it was a house for secular canonesses.
Oh, okay.
So canonesses being women that were singing, but these weren't, a lot of these women were like divorced, unmarried, or never married.
Right.
And just kind of, I guess what you would say, bachelor type women?
Yeah, except back in the 1700s, you know, if you were unmarried or divorced or something like that, as a woman, you were kind of, you know, just not part of society anymore. You were kind of tossed out and you know, would end up, you know, presumably in places like these. So,
well, in this particular place, I guess it really kind of boosted her financial situation. So I guess somehow there was support for these people.
Yeah, well, yeah, they were good singers.
Yeah. And this also gave her greater financial independence and allowed for her to continue her music studies and to support her fellow musicians and composers via patronage.
Right.
So anyways, all this before she's 35 years old. Now, in 1758, at 35, she dug deeper into music theory and composition under the instruction of Johann Philipp Kernberger, who was a student of Johann Sebastian Bach.
Ah, okay. Now there's a name I've heard of.
1 degree of separation from the man himself,
Yep.
J.S. Bach. Pretty big guy in the Baroque period, in the Baroque era.
Pretty big, yeah. So Bach is, most famously, he's composing in the late Baroque era. So at this point, instrumental music is absolutely a thing, right? There are, Toccata and Fugue, which is a solo organ piece. There are concerti, orchestras, playing with solo instruments and all kinds of things. So at this point, we absolutely have instrumental music.
And while she was studying composition for at least 5 years with this Philip Kernberger, she didn't even release anything. She didn't really officially begin composing until in her mid-40s. So, I kind of wonder if ageism was a thing back then, like it is today, because then she had her gender and her age going against her.
Right.
But she composed a lot of military band music, which was rare for a female composer, which were pretty rare in the first place, right?
Right, yeah.
She also composed many chamber works such as trios, marches, cantatas, sonatas, songs, and fugues, which is some pretty complex composition, right?
Oh, very, yeah. Sonatas and fugues in particular, the fugue, the Baroque fugue is sort of a famously highly structured musical form. And I don't know if we've ever talked about that on the podcast or not. Probably not. I would remember, but
I would too, because I remember that sonata episode. Ooh,
that's nothing compared to writing a fugue. That's,
right. It's child's play, I guess. Have you written a fugue yet, Matt?
Oh, back when I was a student and it was assigned to me, writing fugues just for the fun of it is a little bit not my thing.
Yeah, we can use that for the intro to the fugue episode because I'm not going to learn how to write a fugue. The sonata was tough enough. But anyways, so among her compositions, one of her personal favorites was when she set the text of Rommler's Der Tod Jesu, The Death of Jesus, to music. That was one of her favorites of her own. In addition, Princess Anna Amalia of Prussia was also a collector of music. Her library consisted of over 600 volumes by composers such as J.S. Bach, of course, Handel, Telemann, and C.P.E. Bach,
Carl Philipp Emanuel.
Yes, among others. And this collection is known as the Amalian Bibliotheque.
Nice.
She has a library named after her.
Indeed.
And this is still around today. So I think it's safe to say that her contributions to and the preservation thereof the musical arts in Germany are alive and well today, over 2 centuries after her death in 1787 at 62.
I would definitely say so, yes.
So that is the Baroque era. We have 3 more composers of the classical era, and we're a bit up in time, but I think that this can just be an extra long episode, right? Because we only do one a month anyways. Are you okay with continuing?
Sure.
Okay. Let's get into the classical era. So that was the Baroque era, and that was, again, what did we say, 1600 through 1750?
Yes.
Now, in 1750 or somewhere in that neighborhood, we had the classical era. Now, do you want to talk about some of the changes that occurred in the classical era compared to the Baroque?
So, whereas the art of polyphony, so the Baroque era was really kind of, it was kind of interesting in some ways because the Baroque era started off very homophonic with the Florentine Camerata and all that stuff. It becomes very, very polyphonic with Bach and Telemann and Handel and all of those guys. And whereas the art of polyphony arguably reaches its absolute pinnacle with J.S. Bach. Mm-hmm. Right. The classical era is, first of all, signified by the maturation of what we consider harmony today. So if you listen to the first major composer who is granted put into the category of a classical era composer, which would be Franz Joseph Haydn, this is very much homophonic, meaning this is music of, one passing 6/4 to 1/6, chord, half cadence, chord, chord, perfect authentic cadence. So all of the stuff we think of as teaching you tonal harmony today, this is the early maturation of that. Mm-hmm. It is the first of what we consider to be the standard repertoire, which is just the basics of what we call quote unquote classical music. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so it is very homophonic. It is music that is very, very balanced. We mentioned the age of enlightenment, or a child of the Enlightenment. So the Enlightenment is the notion that rather than do things just because we've always done them, or rather than do things because rather than have things like have princes because their father was, or kings because their father was king, and God must have designated them to be king and all this stuff, that we should have governments that make laws based on ration and reason and what is absolutely best and good for everyone. That we should live in our individual lives according to reason and rationality and logic, and all of these things, rather than let our passions. The phrase for everything that come before it, Dark Ages, is mm-hmm. coined in this time. Right? So they consider everything before the Enlightenment to be of the Dark Ages, and we don't even use that term anymore. We say the Middle Ages and the Renaissance, right? And
people in the Dark Ages certainly didn't use that word, did they?
No, they didn't. This is a pejorative term they coined for, because now we've awoken into the light of our reason, right? And so this affects art by making everything balanced, everything proportional, everything logical and reasonable. Sonata Form comes out of this period, mm-hmm. And we talked about Sonata Form recently, and it's this idea of periods and double periods, ending in half cadences and authentic cadences, being expanded on to make rounded binary form, which rounded means the music that begins it also ends it. So there's this balanced idea. This idea of balance between strings having the first theme of a sonata form and winds having the second theme. So there's this balance. It is the age of balance and reason. It is the age of tonal harmony in the way that we understand it, probably most clearly in a most crystallized form. And it is the age of musical genres like the string quartet, like the symphony, like the chamber sonata, either solo piano or piano with some instrument, right? It is the age in which, for the first time, everybody, not just the nobles or the extremely wealthy, but everyone can enjoy music because concert halls show up. So in addition to having the court of some noble and the church for as being our two big sources of places you can go and hear music, now we also have this new one in addition to the other two, that is the concert hall, where you can just go in, pay a fee for entry and go and sit and listen to music freshly written by some composer and performed by a group of musicians. So this is the classical era in a nutshell.
Yeah. Sounds like an exciting time to be a musician.
Yeah.
And among these musicians, we will begin with Mary Ann Martinez. Anna Katerina Martinez was born on the 4th of May, 1744, and this was in Vienna, Austria. Mm-hmm. And I was curious about that last name, her being an Austrian composer, right?
Right.
It turns out her mother, Maria Theresia, was Austrian, but her paternal grandfather was a Spanish soldier who arrived via Naples, Italy, in the late 1600s.
Oh, fascinating.
Now, her father, Nico, served as a Neapolitan military officer. And of course, that's Naples, again, Italy. But in the 1720s, he moved to Vienna to work for the papal ambassador's office. Anyways, she changed her name from Caterina to Mariana out of personal preferences. She also changed the Z at the end of her name, Martinez, to an S to accommodate the German pronunciation.
Make it a little more Austrian sounding.
Well, actually, the Germans were seeing that name and reading it as Martinetz with the TZ. So she's like, okay, we'll just put an S in there. And she also used German form Marianne instead of Mariana on occasion. So she kind of changed it up a little bit, like to change it up. Now, her dad was friends with poet laureate of Vienna and composer Antonio Trepassi, a.k.a. Metastasio. Are you familiar with this? Have you ever heard of Metastasio?
No.
Well, that's what he named himself, and that translates as in the transition from one realm or place to another, like from the living to the dead, that kind of thing.
Right, yeah, that makes sense.
Anyways, this composer, he lived with the Martinez family, and he recognized her musical talent early on. They all lived in the same building, and another person that lived in this building was a young budding musician, Franz Joseph Haydn.
Oh, that guy, huh?
Yeah, a Hungarian in Italy. Shortly thereafter, when she was 10, upon Metastasio's direction, she took vocal lessons from Nicola Popora, also an Italian vocal coach and composer, who also lived in the same building. Now, Nicola was on the second floor. The Martinezes were on the third floor. Haydn, a struggling musician, lived on the fourth floor, or even further up. Now, because there was no elevators for convenience, the convenience went to the wealthy. So whenever you did have these big buildings, the richer people would live on the bottom floor.
I see, yeah.
So, anyways, during this time, she showed some pretty impressive composing skills and began to study under Giuseppe Bono and Johann Adolf Hasse. So she got a little bit of Italian influence and a little bit of German influence from her studies and from the people that Metastasio hooked her up with. Now, thanks to a fire, or should I say no thanks to a fire, in 1927, many of her compositions were lost, and it's hard to say how early she began composing. Among these salvaged documents, there were at least 3 found from 1760 when she was 16 years old. And 2 of these were Catholic masses, and one was a motet. What's that again, Matt? The motet?
A motet is a sacred piece for a set number of voices. Is basically a vocal piece that is not a mass, but is nevertheless religious in context and appropriate for the church.
Okay. Anyways, her reputation continued to grow, as did her keyboard and composition skills, and her works and talents were showcased at the chapel of the emperor's court. Also in the 1760s, our good old Metastasio, he sent her music to Padre Giovanni Battista, who was a teacher of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Now, here's a fun fact. Her mass number 1 in D major actually shared similar material to one of young Wolfgang's compositions. So it might be that he kind of got inspired, or maybe even plagiarized her a bit.
Maybe.
That's a strong word. But anyways, let's say that he could have easily been influenced by her. I think it's safe to say that. Now, her third mass was praised by Battista for its complexity. It was 150 pages with parts for soloists, full chorus, and a robust orchestra of trumpets, oboes, flutes, strings, and organ. Very complex, very big. And this also further boosted her presence. And she also celebrated a rare independence as a composer because she wasn't connected with any formal employment. Like she wasn't like the Medici's, main teacher or anything like that. She mainly composed for her own enjoyment, and she was able to generate income from writing for court and religious events. And she also held many social events revolving around music and art at her home. So anyways, Maria Martinez died of tuberculosis in December of 1812. And she never married, and some speculate that this may have had to do with her financial independence and a satisfying professional career. So
probably.
good on her. I don't need a man.
It really didn't. It really didn't.
You know, of her 150 reported compositions, 65 have survived. And she was also a fond acquaintance of Mozart, and they frequently performed together. Her final surviving composition was a chamber cantata for solo voice in 1786. So that's a 26-year in composition that we know of.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So that, my friends, is Marianne Martinez. Moving on, shall we? We have another Maria coming up here. And you might have heard of this one, Matt. Maria Anna Mozart.
Oh, yes.
In 1764, Leopold Mozart wrote...
Leopold Mozart being the father of Wolfgang and Maria, right?
Yes. Yeah. So he said, what it all amounts to is this, that my little girl, although she is only 12 years old, is one of the most skillful players in Europe. How old was Mozart when he said that, I wonder? How old was Wolfgang when he said that, I wonder?
You know, I don't know that I've ever heard which one was even the eldest sibling, so it's hard to say.
I want to say Wolfgang was the younger of the two.
Leopold was given to trumpeting his children and just, saying things like this about both of his children.
You know, the more I read this, the more he started to sound like Joseph Jackson.
Yeah.
Ruthless and relentless patriarch of the Jackson family for Michael Jackson, Jackson 5 and all those.
Right. Yeah, that's not an entirely unfair comparison.
Maria was born in 1751 in Salzburg, Germany.
Right.
Anna, nicknamed Nanner, she was 5 years Wolfgang's senior. Okay, that clears that up.
Okay, well, good.
Leopold began teaching her at age 8, and Mozart was often by her side at age 3.
Wolfgang Mozart.
Wolfgang, I keep on saying Mozart, even though this is Anna we're talking about. Maria Anna Mozart we're talking about. So in 1762, and I think it's also notable that these kids started so early, because when you start music early, it's I think your brain absorbs it better.
Yeah, well, when it's the 1700s and your father is a passionate, if some would argue mediocre musician and composer, pretty much as soon as you can sit upright at the piano, your education is going to begin.
Right. Well, in 1762, Maria and Wolfgang played for Maximilian III in Munich.
In
Munch, Germany. She was 11 years old, he was 6, and this was part of a 3-year tour in which they covered 88 cities at that age. 3-year tour, 88 cities. And in 1764, Maria helped Wolfgang pen his first symphony, that is K16.
Mm-hmm.
How do we know that's his first?
Well...
It's K16.
The K in K16 refers to the work's Cockle number, Kochel. This is the guy who researched and categorized all of Mozart's known manuscripts. Mm-hmm. A couple of centuries ago, I think. And anyway, so if it has the earliest K number of any of his symphonies, then that's probably the best we know. That means that the research has been done, and as far as is known, that is the first one.
Yeah, but it's number 16. That's why I'm confused. Maybe it's the first.
It would be his
one.
16th work categorized by Cockle.
Okay, so it's your symphony. Symphony.
He wasn't just categorizing symphonies. It was all of his music. So it may be his 16th composition, but his first, his first symphony.
Good clarification. I know I did learn that somewhere down the road, but it's good to have a little refresher course. So
That's what I'm here for.
I know. It comes in handy. Now, when Maria was 18 years old, back in 1769, Leo took her out of the performance circuit as she was eligible for marriage, as if she couldn't do both, you know? And it wasn't until 15 years later, at 33, that she actually married. So she gave birth to 3 children and ultimately settled in Salzburg, taking up work as a music teacher. So she ended up dying at 78 years old in 1829. And though her compositions have not been really well recorded or preserved, Wolfgang was a big fan.
Of course.
He wrote to her in 1770, "My dear sister, I am in awe that you can compose so well. In a word, the song you wrote is beautiful." I assume after hearing one of her songs. So that is Maria Anna Mozart. Okay.
A big figure, actually, and a big underserved figure. You know, underrepresented, untalked about, which is, you know, living in the shadow of her much more famous younger brother. You know?
Absolutely. But still instrumental in his success, right?
Obviously, yeah.
Because be it by absorption or just being in her presence, he got a very early start hearing her music. And so that's pretty cool. It's pretty great.
Absolutely.
And now we have our final composer to speak of on this episode. And like I said, at this point, I was just kind of looking around to find some people who had interesting stories who weren't necessarily Italian or German, you know?
Right.
And I did find this one, Jane Mary Guest, who is actually English. Are you familiar with her?
I know this is a new one to me as well. I'm learning so much.
She was also known as Jenny Guest. She was born in 1762 in Bath, which is Somerset, England. That town was named after all the Roman bathhouses, I guess. It's kind of interesting.
You got me.
Yeah. Her father, Thomas Guest, was a tailor. And at the time, it was kind of rare for a child without musical parents to get into music, as you can imagine.
It's kind of rare now.
Yeah, it really is. But I think that parents who played music also had access to instruments which were not cheap back then.
Sure.
And I'd be curious to hear how the tailor at the time, unless he was like the king or queen's tailor, was able to support.
Well,
her,
I was going to speculate. I mean, tailors could have been. I mean, tailors would have been middle class, I believe. So they may have had some money to invest in, you know, things like music lessons.
Yeah. I guess I'm not really entirely sure how accessible or inaccessible it really was back then. I should just speculate on those things. But anyways, her music teachers early in life were Thomas Orpin and Thomas Linley. And I guess they were known in their circles as good composers. By the age of 6, she was giving piano performances around Bath. So another early start, you know. At age 14, she became the pupil of Johann Christian Bach. Hey.
Who is one of the many children of Johann Sebastian Bach.
Yeah.
And many of the Bach children are actually considered classical composers. Carl Philipp Emanuel and Johann Christian being the two big sons of Bach who in the era after their father are established and known composers. There are others, but yeah.
Yeah. But I definitely remember seeing J.C. Bach in a few different places and C.P.E. Bach, you know.
Yeah.
So anyways, J.C. Bach was her teacher, and she also studied under Antonio Sacchini, an Italian opera composer. So again, we have a good blend of Italian and German composing, songwriting.
In the classical era, a lot of the composers are German and Italian, where they were Italian and French a lot in the Renaissance. In the classical era, they become German and Italian, and then in the Romantic era, which is what's to come, they become everything. But
Yeah. Some of my favorite Romantic era composers are, I guess, some Hungarian composers and Romanian and
Hungarian, Romanian, Czech, Russian,
Back to Jane Mary. By 1779, at 17 years old, she was performing in London and was doing these subscription concerts in the early 1780s. Are you familiar with the subscription concerts? It's kind of what it sounds like.
Yeah, will you pay for the privilege of attending several of these performances?
Yep, it's kind of like season tickets.
Right, yeah.
Prepaid shows. Also, during that time, she eventually published her first work. This was 6 piano sonatas with violin or flute accompanying.
So that's interesting because a violin sonata is a work for violin with piano accompaniment. Is considered the piano is considered the accompaniment instrument. Yeah. Is it different that this is a piano sonata with violin or flute accompanying? I mean, is this just as a violin sonata and she titled it weird, or is it somehow different in its?
That's a very good question, because when I think about those two instruments, piano versus violin or piano versus flute, I do think that the piano is typically accompanying with chords or.
Yeah, and you know, we say accompanying, of course, the quote unquote accompaniment part to a lot of violin sonatas are extraordinarily hard, right?
Yeah, right.
I mean, and prominent in the texture and all that, but
yeah. Interesting. Good question. I'm not sure about the answer to that one. But by 1785, these sonatas were being published in France and Germany. So it's kind of spread out.
So she'd made it big.
Yeah. In 1789, she had married an accountant, Abram Allen Miles, at 45. Hey, Matt, we got ourselves another accountant composer love interest. Here.
So there is a precedent, huh?
Oh, yeah, man. I think that could be a handy thing for a musician.
Somebody that knows something about money? Yeah, absolutely.
You'll testify, won't you? But anyways, so now at this point, she's taken on the last name Miles, which is where people might have heard of Jane Mary Miles also. And 15 years later, while still composing, she would go on to teaching Princess Amalia, daughter of George II, not to be confused with
the other one, yeah.
The other one we just covered. And Princess Charlotte of Wales. So in 1846, she died in Blackheath, London, and her most remembered works were the 6 sonatas we talked about of her first opus, and then her sonata in 1807, and a number of vocal pieces with keyboard accompaniment, such as The Fairies' Dance, Will You Gang to the Burnside? That's interesting. I know gang is go. Will you go? Will you go?
Will you gang? Yeah, that sounds like English folk music, doesn't it?
To the Burnside, yeah. And Fair One, Take This Rose. And to me, these sound pretty secular. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, they sound folk. They sound folk.
And I was also personally delighted to see that she had used a lot of text from other writers and poets, and mainly Robert Burns. Who is definitely a secular kind of guy.
You're a fan of Robert Burns, huh?
I am, actually, if you can imagine. And
is there a direct line of descendancy there, or?
No, unfortunately, I don't believe there is. We are actually, our Burns, Burns, came from Byrne from Ireland.
Oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense.
We changed it to sound slightly less Irish. As we were persecuted back then.
Yeah, you know.
But anyways, so Robert Burns, he had the poems The Bonnie Wee Wife and The Bonnie Lassie. She took those 2 poems and set them to music. So I thought that's kind of interesting. Yeah. It's kind of cool. It seemed to be a fairly common practice if you were a composer and maybe you didn't write as much, or maybe even if you did, you would still sometimes take other poets' words and put music to them.
Oh, that's still that's very much a tradition. That's a German tradition too. Well, that's a tradition all over Europe throughout all of the time periods. It's the idea of the art song, taking words by taking the text of a poem and setting it to music. It's really only a 20th century pop thing where you're expected to write the music and the words.
Yeah, now as I was going to say, there might even be an occasion or two where that does happen. Now that I think about it, because there are professional songwriters whose faces and voices never get to be seen or heard.
Yeah, who is that? But there was a poet / musician who would set his own poetry to music, and he's Leonard Cohen. There you go.
Oh yeah, man. Yeah. Good Lord, he's one of my favorite songwriters of all time.
Yeah, a poet. Someone who is thought to be a poet as much as he is thought to be a musician, right?
I would completely agree.
Yeah.
Completely. Well, on that note, man, I guess that wraps up our discussion on Women in Music Part 2.
Indeed. So next time we do this, we'll do the Romantic era.
Yeah, we'll get into the Romantic era. And you know what? Having done this episode and having gone a little bit over our usual time, maybe we'll just focus on the one Romantic era, because I feel like we'll have enough, hopefully, female composers.
We'll have plenty, yeah.
To do that with. And the more the merrier, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
And again, we covered today the Baroque era with Francesca Caccini and Barbara Strozzi and Princess Anna Amalia of Prussia.
Mm-hmm.
And then we moved on to the classical period, 1750 to 1800, and discussed Marianne Martinez, Maria Anna Mozart, and then Jane Mary Guest. And I thought it was a lot of fun digging up and learning more about these composers.
I learned so much. It really, I learned a lot. I love it when I learn stuff.
We were due for another history episode, I reckon.
We were, absolutely.
And let's see, what did we do before this? Strings. We talked about strings and arrangement, or
orchestration.
Orchestration, that was it. So that might mean that we are due for another ear training episode.
It might just.
We'll see what happens with all that.
We shall see.
It's
a devilish little grin he's got.
Right. Okay, so I guess, where we normally do a recap, it's just a history episode, so go back and listen again.
Go back and listen to the episode again.
And write us if you have anything, any questions or comments. We'd love to hear from our listeners.
Absolutely, and we look forward to doing this again soon.
All right.
Take care.
We hope you enjoyed that little discussion. There are still many amazing women composers to discuss, so keep listening for that. Also, keep your eyes out for our website and social media pages. We'll let you know when that merchandise is looking its best and ready to go. And as always, for questions or comments, contact us at info@musicstudent101.com.